You're listening to Brave Girls with Tracy M., where we choose to empower you to be a better leader, mentor, and coach in the world. We'll share stories of people who have achieved great heights by overcoming adversity and rising to the challenge, all while pursuing their passions. These courageous people will inspire you to have faith in yourself and take bold action. Right here with the host of Brave Girls, Tracy M.
Episode 55, Have Confidence with Amy Bradley. Today's podcast episode is my conversation with attorney Amy Bradley, who's a friend of Brave Girl guest Frances Reimers. You listened to her on episode 19 from the great state of Wyoming. I found Amy to be smart, compassionate, confident, and giving. Her competitive nature shines through in our conversation, and she shares what winning and losing means in different situations. Amy's also currently the deputy town attorney for the Town of Vienna, Virginia, and she shares what she's learned in that role. Amy explains why she originally went into television journalism, what her experience was like as a reporter, and how she pivoted to a career in law after covering several high-profile trials. Since graduating from law school, Amy has represented individuals facing serious criminal charges, including multiple felony charged drug distributions, sex offenses, embezzlement, and murder. She shares how rewarding she has found her pro bono work assisting victims of domestic abuse when they need to obtain protective orders against their abusers. We also talk about how to manage through transitions that occur throughout your life and how to stay true to who you really are. Amy also tells what her mentors taught her about how to have confidence. We talk about why it's so important to being open to being coached and mentored. She currently pays it forward with high school students, law students, and young attorneys through her mentoring activities. She's an active volunteer and recognized leader in not only her field, but in her community. I found her Brave Girl story to be fascinating and her career path interesting, and I think you will too. So let's go meet Amy Bradley and learn why she thinks that we all need to have confidence.
So welcome to Brave Girls with Tracy M. Today, I'm really excited. I get to meet Amy Bradley, who is a friend of Frances Reimers, who was another guest on the Brave Girls. Frances was a personal branding expert that I had met through marketing and communications in the greater Washington, Baltimore region. And I come to find out that she and Amy grew up together in Wyoming. So welcome to the show, Amy.
Thanks so much for having me, Tracy. It's honestly a pleasure to be here. I feel honored to be amongst the ranks of your interviewees.
Oh, yes. So you have quite a backstory in terms of being a television journalist, now turned attorney. So talk a little bit about how you've kind of navigated your career and what you really thought you were going to be doing and how you've kind of blended those skill sets.
Sure. So when I went to journalism school, it was with a real passion for telling the stories that are untold. And what I realized after working in television stations in Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Pennsylvania is that the reality of corporate television news is very different than the journalism that I really wanted to do. I had some great opportunities along the way, and I got to meet some amazing people. I actually interviewed Barack Obama when he was a state senator in Illinois. That was one of course, now the highlights, especially when he became president for obvious reasons. So I had just some amazing experiences, but the reality was that instead of getting to tell the stories that I really wanted to tell, a lot of times it was driven by deadlines and sort of the need to fill that news hole, which kept expanding greater and greater and greater every day because news, unfortunately, for corporations is a cheap product. And so we were being demanded to do more with less resources. And I think the writing really was on the wall. The other thing that really changed is that people stopped consuming journalism in the way that they used to. So now I actually think it's wonderful that there's so many podcasts and things like that. Serial, of course, is one of my favorites, that really dive deep into subjects and really get to do the investigative journalism. That's really what I was passionate about. And so it was actually through covering trials that I became, I'll be honest, I had never sat in a courtroom before being a journalist and covering some high profile trials. And those trial experiences and getting to watch what the attorneys were doing became very fascinating to me. And I was sort of at a point also with the journalism where I felt like I was sometimes looking for stories where there might not be stories, or creating controversy where there might not really be a big controversy. So, and sometimes what I was also frustrated by being a television journalist is we were given a minute 30 to tell our story, no matter what the story was. And I guess the challenge of telling the story really wore off very quickly. I wanted to be more challenged. I wanted to use my intellect and my investigative curiosities in a different way. And that's what I saw by, getting to watch these amazing attorneys and these high profile trials, both criminal and civil. And I just, it just lit a fire in me. And I thought, the handwriting is on the wall with where journalism, and particularly television journalism, is headed. And I just thought this is a great opportunity for me to reevaluate where I'm at. What are my goals? Where do I want to end up? And so that's really what led me to decide to go to law school.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I agree with you. A minute 30 isn't enough to really dig deep, get into the, what's really going on. And I'm curious what it was about, as you were watching these attorneys, what it was that really kind of struck you, that you said, that's what I want to go do.
Honestly, I think it was their passion. You could tell the amount of work that they had done in preparing for these trials. You could tell the way that they believed in the person or the entity that they were representing. And I just thought, wow, I mean, getting to advocate for someone, and basically you become their voice in a courtroom where, you are their navigator. And I just thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity. And to have the ability to be able to advocate for someone else and have that person trust you with sometimes what is their life. It was very intriguing to me, and I thought I really would love that opportunity to be able to be someone else's voice, which I think is actually kind of the same thing that I liked about investigative journalism. I think the two actually parallel very interestingly.
Right. And so you kind of extracted yourself from the television journalism world to then deep dive into, you went to George Mason for your law degree. And did you go full time, or did you go part time, or how'd you do that?
I did go full time. It was kind of a decision that I decided where, if you go through the night program at any law school, as far as I know, it's always a 4-year program. Mm-hmm. So I thought, the opportunity cost of maybe just going full time is less than giving up 4 years of my life and then being exhausted all the time trying to work full time and go to law school. And I really wanted to give law school my 100% effort and attention, because I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it 100%. And I really, at that point, I think had decided that at least for the time being, I was going to take a hiatus from journalism. When I actually came down to DC to go to law school, I was actually approached by one of the photographers who had been a photographer in the same market as I was in Pennsylvania. And he said, when are you going to start reporting again? And, it was a little intriguing to me at the time. I thought, maybe next year I'll start doing that part-time. But then I ended up interning, or law clerking, as they call it when you're in law school, for an amazing criminal law firm that does a ton of high-profile cases. And it was just so intriguing to me that I just sort of lost the need, I guess, to do the journalism, because I was getting to see like the insides, right? The guts of these cases, the photographs, and the having the communications with the clients and that sort of thing that you never get to have when you're on the other side. And so I just honestly, I just decided, I was like, I'm not sure that right now journalism is where I want to be. I'm kind of intrigued with this, this law stuff.
Yeah, well, you can always go back to the journalism. And I think that, I think even probably as an attorney, when you're working on these high profile cases, where the journalist is coming from that's trying to tell it in a minute 30, right? And so,
Exactly.
yeah. And so you know how to navigate through that. So, I mean, wow. And then you also worked for an insurance company at some point.
I did. So after getting, I worked for that firm for about 4 years as a law clerk and then as an attorney, my first law firm. And then I decided at that point, what actually happened is that all my mentors left at the same time. So it would have just been me and then the two very senior attorneys. So I sort of panicked and thought, gosh, I'm a person who really feels the need to be mentored and taught on a very individual level. And I've always been that way. And so when my mentors all left, I decided maybe this is a good time for me to transition and get some other types of experience. So that's actually what led me to working for, I worked for State Farm as an in-house attorney there. And talk about being mentored. I was very lucky to have very senior attorneys and attorneys just who had been doing it for 5 years longer than I had. Who really took me under their wing and taught me a lot. And what was wonderful about State Farm is that I got tons of trial experience. There were weeks where I had 4 trials a week. They were not in big circuit court, but they were in the smaller claims court. And so those were great experiences for me because I really learned how to try a case. And it gave me the confidence to be able to go and try a case without feeling scared or nervous, and really built up my confidence, which was something that as an attorney I really needed.
Yeah, I think it's really important that as you're kind of growing into whatever your profession is to get your confidence up, and that the higher you go, the higher your confidence needs to be. Because I sort of feel like sometimes at the highest levels, that's where the sharks live sometimes. And if they sense that you don't have if they can your confidence, that can really sink your ship. So I think it's important to have that confidence and to get the experience. And I think it's good that you're open to being mentored and taught, right? I think that's also something that I talk to people a lot about, is you've always got to have mentors, coaches, and guides, and you've always got to invest in yourself, and you've always got to, be open to being coached and receiving feedback.
Definitely. And I think that the reason that I've been able to have the successes that I've been able to have is because I've had many mentors and, coaches along the way who have really taken me under their wing and said, this is why we do it this way. There's a better way to do it. This is how to do it. And then, you take that feedback and you incorporate it into whatever it is that you're doing. And I think really that's been a big key to my successes, actively seeking out mentors and taking their advice when it's appropriate, obviously, and then continuing to like foster relationships. I also try to take those experiences and pass them along to the next generation. I often try to mentor with brand new attorneys, people who are just coming out of law school, and people who are still in law school, and just let them know that if they've had a bad semester in grades, or if they've had a bad court appearance, it's really about owning up to it, and saying, how can I move forward in a more positive direction? And I think that just as people gave to me, like I want to be able to give back to them. It's really important to me.
Yeah, and I think that I feel the same way. I feel like, the higher you go, the more of responsibility you have to reach behind you and bring that next generation forward and to give them your best advice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I really do. And I saw that on your bio, sort of your whole paragraph of all of the pro bono work you do, all of the volunteer work that you do. And it just kind of came across to me. I was like, wow, she's really committed you've got your day job, you're doing all this stuff, but like you're giving back, and serving from a really good place. For example, I saw you routinely assist victims with domestic abuse who are victims of domestic abuse in obtaining protective orders against their abusers through Legal Services of Northern Virginia's Attorney of the Day program. I mean, things like that. Those people can't afford, I'm sure, to hire the legal help that they desperately need at that point in their life.
Those cases have been some of, honestly, the most rewarding cases that I get the opportunity, honestly, to work on and work with those victims. I have many times been, in situations I will never forget. I had a woman come into my office, and she was literally living in her car because her husband was physically abusing her to the point where she really could not return home. She didn't have any assets because he controlled all the money, which is often the case in domestic abuse cases. And although she had a job, she didn't have a paycheck that was readily available to her or any money in her account. And so she was living in her car. It was the middle of winter. And, she was very concerned that night she was going to run out of gas. And I hardly ever have any cash. Like, we live in a cashless society, but I went into my purse and, I think I had $20 or something. I mean, nothing substantial, but, there was a need to give her whatever I had. I mean, if it would have been appropriate, I would have asked her if she, I would have said, would you come stay at my house? Now, of course, I can't do that because that's crossing too many lines of separation. But, I went and looked for shelters for her to stay at and gave her some resources as far as places she could reach out, because this woman was just in a terrible situation. And I could tell you many stories like that, but those cases are the ones that I remember at the end of the year, when I'm kind of doing the recap of what has this year been like. Sometimes those are the most rewarding cases. You're really helping someone who cannot afford an attorney and who desperately needs help.
Right. Now, and I would imagine that across the U.S. anyway, there are resources that are available in different states and cities for people that might find themselves in this situation, correct?
There are a lot of resources. I think one of the biggest difficulties in this area is that the resources are listed on like websites. Well, if you're living in your car, you may not have the ability to be able to go and do research on a computer. And to reach out to those resources. And then another component is that sometimes these victims, in addition to being victims of physical violence, have become, mentally unstable. And so they're dealing with depression and anxiety and PTSD and other mental health disorders. And so they may not be in a place where they're even capable of reaching out to those resources, even if they know what the resources are. And so sometimes it's just as simple as making a phone call to a shelter or trying to get them set up. I mean, there's even resources in Northern Virginia where women can, and I think this is such a cool program, women can donate their professional clothing to this resource, and then that gives these victims sometimes clothing to wear to court when they come in, because they may not even have, an appropriate outfit that they would feel comfortable appearing in court in. And I know that, one of my clients actually had already taken advantage of that by the time she came to court. And it was just wonderful, because you could tell that just being appropriately dressed, she felt better coming in and she felt more confident. And that's what I want. I want for everyone that I represent, to feel confident that they are doing the right thing, in confronting their abuser, especially in those cases.
Yeah. So that's sort of on your pro bono side. So what's kind of your interest now in the type of work that you're doing in terms of your practice areas?
So my practice areas are pretty versatile. The two big ones right now are I'm doing plaintiff's work for personal injury cases, and then also criminal defense. those are probably my biggest two, although I do have just regular sort of civil litigation cases, as well as, we represent corporations, on a variety of different types of matters. So it's really pretty varied, but the two biggest ones are criminal defense and personal injury. And then, strangely enough, I'm actually a part-time prosecutor. So I serve as the deputy town attorney for a local town. And so I prosecute the misdemeanors and traffic offenses once a week on that docket. And it's actually an interesting thing because I've certainly never done prosecutorial work before. I started at this firm, which has been about a year and a half. And it actually helps me, I think, with the criminal defense as well, because I see really both sides to every case now, which I think actually makes the best attorneys are the ones that can really see what is the other side going to argue, and then how can I help prepare my case or my defense, to combat that.
Yeah. So you've been at the attorney game now for close to almost a decade, right?
Yeah,
Including
surprisingly.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably as long as you were a journalist, right? And so I think back to the earlier part of the conversation where you were saying that you were just fascinated by these attorneys and the passion that they had in the court. So has it really lived up to like what you thought it would be?
Yes.
And then some.
Yeah, it's been so much fun. And I think that people don't go into law unless they're competitive, and of course I'm extremely competitive. And so when I go into the courtroom, my sole mission is to win.
Right.
And sometimes winning takes different forms. So sometimes it's keeping your client out of jail. Sometimes it's having a not guilty verdict. And then sometimes on a personal injury case, it's beating the best offer that you've received from the insurance company. So there's winning looks different. I think people think, well, if you're not declared the winner, right? If it's not a not guilty, you're not the winner. But obviously, and particularly in extremely difficult cases with, difficult circumstances, a win takes on different forms. And so, I think that looking back and sort of getting the opportunity to see those attorneys and their passion, I think as I look around as an attorney now, I see some of these attorneys that have been practicing and they're now in their 50s, 70s even, and they've lost their passion. And I think the minute you lose your passion, it's time to retire. It's time to get out of the game, because there are attorneys out there that want to work their tail off for the clients. And I hope that all of my clients feel that way, that I did everything I could to represent them to the, very, very best of my ability. And I just hope, when I go into court now, I'm excited, I'm like, let's go. And so, I had a case recently where, actually just last week, and when we walked out of court, there were 30 members of this community. I'm guesstimating, who were cheering because we'd gotten, the correct result, and it was just one of those moments, like, you can't describe that feeling of happiness and contentment, and just feeling happy for your client because that the right result was reached. And so, moments like that are just 100% worth it.
So on the flip side, what happens when you walk out and you're disappointed and it's not the best possible outcome that you were hoping for? And I'm talking like extreme, like you're like, how did that even happen? Because that does happen.
And it does happen. I wish I could say it doesn't. So, those, luckily, we're pretty lucky on the legal side, because there's almost always a chance to either get a redo or at least have an appeal.
Yes.
And I usually encourage my clients, and, to the extent that I can, I will say, listen, I will try not to, charge you too much if we have to appeal this, or, whatever you can do to try to facilitate the correct result, because it doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had clients that I think have been wrongfully charged. And, I like to win those cases, and if it means going up onto an appeal to get that right result, then that's what I want to do, and I encourage them to do that. but it can be disheartening. But I think those are the moments you have to reflect and say, what lessons did I learn from this?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to, right the ship? And then sort of moving forward, decide how you're going to attack the case differently.
Right, right. Now, do you oftentimes get attached to your clients?
Oh, yes.
So I was like, how do you, I was going to say, because you're like, I'm going to win, I'm going to be competitive. And, I would
Yeah.
think that your heart probably pulls on you at some points.
Oh, it definitely does. And, one of the hardest things is, just like you were saying, it doesn't always go your way. And so one of the hardest things is when you are speaking with a client and saying, I'm really sorry it didn't go our way. But what I have found is that, your clients, if they believe that you've gone in and done everything that you could do, and they see that maybe it just, maybe the judge was having a bad day.
Right.
Maybe the evidence didn't come out in the way that you were expecting it to come out. Or, maybe somebody was just lying in the courtroom, which also happens. I
Right.
wish it didn't, but it does.
Right.
And so, when those circumstances happen, I've been very honored because, I'm actually thinking of a specific client right now, and they say, it's okay because I know you did everything you could. And so that
Mm-hmm.
makes me be able to not sleep that night, because I definitely won't sleep that night, but maybe
Right.
like 2 nights later, it's, you kind of move on, and then you figure out how you're going to do better when, the case comes back.
Right. Right. So let me go back to your days in Wyoming. What was it like growing up in Wyoming? I just
Oh,
have this picture in my
so
mind. It's like,
so different than sort of the DC metropolitan area. So literally I grew up with horses. I rode horses. I actually showed horses, and I lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is where there's a huge rodeo called Cheyenne Frontier Days. I think it's the largest outdoor rodeo in the world. They're kind of famous for that.
Mhm.
And so I was they have these horseback flag bearers.
Yes,
A good
yes,
ambassador, goodwill
yes,
ambassadors, I think is what they call us, the
yes.
dandies. So I was a dandy in high school. I think I only did it for 1 year. You could do it for up to 4, but 1 year was enough for me. Let me just tell you, 16 teenage girls all together all the time creates drama. And it was a great deal of fun. We traveled all over, but the girl drama when you're in high school is just, it can be a little much. So 1 year was enough for me, but it was a wonderful experience. I loved it. So what you're picturing as growing up in Wyoming, for me, it actually is true. Not all of my friends had horses and that experience, but I definitely did. I was, of course, involved in the FFA, which used to stand for Feed
Ah,
the Farmers of America, but now it's just the National FFA organization. And one of the things that really did for me was that was another confidence builder. I did a lot of the public speaking competitions through that. And, we had a couple of teams that we ended up going to national competitions, and we got to travel for that. And then I also was involved in the speech and debate during high school, which of course, was fun, competitive, and then, worked on my communication skills, which I think all of that is really kind of how I decided that I wanted to become a journalist. And so it's funny how these things are all cyclical,
yes,
and it's, they're paving a path forward for you, even though you don't see it at the time.
totally. Totally. I totally agree. Well, I wanted to be an on-air sports broadcaster. And at the time, there weren't any on-air female sports broadcasters. So I have a podcast now. So I feel like
You made it.
I made it. Right, right. I mean, podcast that's in 28 countries, right? And
That's unbelievable. It's really amazing.
in a very short period of time, too.
Well, and I think it shows you that you're filling a void in the market. I think women are looking to be empowered. I think they're looking to hear inspiring stories from other women who have been successful and sort of created something for themselves. And that's, I think, your podcast. It's always inspiring. Just great women on it who are doing amazing things, and just have wonderful insights to share with other people.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that was sort of my vision, and it's kind of manifested itself even more amazing than I expected. I mean, I expected it would be good, but I didn't realize the reach would be as far and that the conversations that I have with people so deep.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so my finale question is always, what's the bravest thing that you've ever done and how does it inspire you today? And so you've done quite a bit on your very short journey here, and are extremely successful doing your thing out in the world. And I'd like to know, what was that brave thing?
You know, I think I don't really think of this as being brave because this was just part of my journey, but my mom always says that me picking up and moving to, I guess it's 5 or 6 different states by myself and doing that without knowing a soul where I was going is brave. And I didn't really look at it that way. I sort of looked at it as an adventure, I think. But now looking back, now that I've actually been planted somewhere for 10 years, um, I guess it really was kind of brave. And starting over every year or 2 years, especially when I was in journalism, and moving into a town, usually a smaller town, especially when I was starting out, and not knowing a soul and having to make friends and form connections and networks. I guess it really was brave, and I didn't realize it at the time, but now I'm like, wow. I mean, I remember literally I loaded, I think I had a friend help me load on one end when I was in Missouri, but I drove a U-Haul truck to Illinois, to a town where I knew no one, and I backed it up to the door, and I unloaded my own furniture using a dolly. I mean, just having no help whatsoever. And I don't even think I realized like how strong I had to be in order to do that. And so I just think that, you might be doing something brave and not even realizing it, because it took me a long time to understand what my mom was talking about. And
Right.
so I guess that's something that I now consider it was brave. It just seemed like an adventure at the time.
Right. Well, and I think also if you commit yourself to television journalism, that's what you do. You start in these smaller markets and then you try and work your way up to a larger market. And if you really do want to kind of hit the big time or whatever, that's what it requires. And I think, from my perspective, because I was going to have to go down that path and I thought, I don't want to go to these little tiny towns where I know no one. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to, take that path. And so I think you were brave, really
I mean,
brave.
there were definitely some hard times. When I was in Illinois, I actually had a convicted sex offender stalking me, and and my dad was so worried about me, and and I really didn't think of it as being brave, but now that I look back, I'm like, okay, that really was kind of crazy. And
Hmm.
I'm kind of, it does make me proud of myself, that I was able to do that. And then when I decided it was time to let it go, I, decided to go to law school, which was an adventure that no one, as far as I know, in my family is an attorney. So, it was just, I'm not afraid, I guess, of the unknown. And so for that, I guess that's what makes me brave.
Yeah, well, even when you decided your time was up or you were done or you were complete as a television journalist, that was a brave move to say, because you had worked so hard to get to where these higher level markets, and so to
Everyone thought
just
I
kind
was
of,
crazy.
well, yeah, I could see why they would.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what? You're just throwing that away? But you know what? Good for you for having that vision to know that you wanted to have that passion that those attorneys had, that you were covering in court, and that a minute 30 wasn't going to be enough.
Yeah, yeah. It was a decision that was difficult, and I really felt like I had lost my sense of identity when I went to law school. I really actually became, I think, a little depressed in the beginning because I didn't know who I was anymore. And I
Right.
was just a student like everybody else. And yet I had had these amazing experiences. And, I went from knowing everyone in town, the mayors and, the senators and, whoever, um, you know, the power players within any given town or city that I was reporting in, to now just being a nobody student. And it was really difficult. But then once I started law clerking at the first firm that I worked at, I started to get that sense of identity back. And man, it made such a huge difference. It made a huge difference actually with my grades at school, and it made a huge difference with me just feeling like I knew who I was again, and really, digging into that and just saying, you know what, this is going to be my new identity. And that was really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that happens whether you lose your job, you quit your job, you change industries, or you get divorced and you have and you're not married anymore, and so then you do have to go back to who am I, and putting a stake in the ground with your new identity. And so I think sometimes that's a transition, and I coach a lot of my clients around their transitions that they go through, because you're going to go through transitions your whole entire life. It's just, how do you manage your way through them? Right.
How do you navigate your way through those difficult times? Some that are expected and planned, and some that are not.
Right. Well, I just want to thank you, Amy, for being on the show today. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and hear your story, and learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing out in the world. And so I'm so glad that Frances connected us.
Well, thanks so much, Tracy. As I said before, such an amazing platform you have here. And I just think it's wonderful how many women around the world you are inspiring.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M. as much as I did creating it. Each show is produced with you, the listener, in mind, as you look for inspiration and motivation from other brave souls as you pursue your desires. I'd love to hear your feedback, so please leave me a review on iTunes. I read every one. And check out my website, tracym.com, for more free resources. You can also join my list and sign up for my newsletter right from the homepage. Until next time, stay strong, believe in your dreams, and go do something brave.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M, and hope that you enjoyed the show. For more information about today's episode, as well as additional free resources to help you achieve greatness in your life, visit tracym.com and sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, dream big, believe in yourself, and let your brilliance shine as only you can do.